at this point, do we have any live action on this? People here in the back at all? No. That does it, just voices don't work. I think at this point we'll have to leave everyone else circling the block trying to find a place to park, but hope that they will all find their way in. I don't know whether we can get any more volume out of that. Does that help? I'm Fred Snowden. Last fall, in response to the declining enrollment situation, which I'm sure you're all aware of, the board appointed a citizens committee consisting of 45 members of the community to assist them in identifying and evaluating alternatives for facility utilization. That committee and members of the board are here this evening to solicit your input collectively into this process. There will be other opportunities, certainly, for you to provide additional input and participate in the process throughout its time frame. As we get into this thing, I'd like to make it very clear initially that there have been no decisions on school closing made by the board, nor have any specific recommendations been formulated by the committee at this time. The members of the committee who will be helping me this evening, I'd like to quickly introduce them. Dr. Curtis Jefferson will be joining us and filling in that corner seat when he arrives. He had another earlier commitment this evening. He is one of the co-chairmen with Marjorie Buxbaum of the Educational Subcommittee. They will be assisted by a member of that committee, Neil Burdett. Irv Feldman, just to my right, is the chairman of the Community Impact Subcommittee. Dick Kaplan, chairman of the Finance Subcommittee. Bob Garda, chairman of the Enrollment Subcommittee, and Bill Lobsher, chairman of the Alternate Building Uses Subcommittee. We will all try to share in answering whatever questions you may have of us this evening. I would also at this point like to ask, if I could, all of the members who are participating in this study committee to stand for just a moment. I'd like them really to be recognized for the very many hours of hard work that they've put in and the involvement and dedication they've shown. I'm hopeful that will encourage them forward so that they stick out the remaining effort, which will consist of just as much work between now and May as they've already accomplished. Our agenda this evening will begin with a very short summary of some of the activities and results that the committee has found to date. We'll try to take a short opportunity then to answer any questions that you may have about that, and then try to proceed as quickly as possible into soliciting your input on criteria, which are going to be very critical in the identification and evaluation of alternatives. I hope you all received a sheet when you came in this evening. It's the one that is predominantly blank. It indicates on it some of the broad areas which we're going to be discussing. We've left the space because we would hope that many of you may prefer to enter some of your comments in written form rather than verbally by microphone. And it's quite possible with the large number of folks and limited time frame that we have that we may run out of time in our discussion of some of the areas. And we want to give you an opportunity to put those additional comments down. They will be summarized and distributed to the appropriate subcommittees so that they can be used in the rest of the analysis. Also, if you have specific questions about anything that has been said or what's going on, and those questions do not get answered, please note those questions on the back, and if you'll put your phone number on that, we will have a member of the committee get back to you and try to get that answered. Also, I think when you came in, another piece of the paper that you may have picked up is titled Enrollment Forecast Data. This is one of really the most recent one of some bulletins that the committee is trying to use to help fill you in on some of the data that's been developed during this study. There were also copies of the first two bulletins, although I expect many of you have already gotten those. But please feel free to pick those up on the way out if you didn't get them on the way in. There'll also be additional bulletins available, I hope a couple more within the next few weeks. They will be distributed through the community associations, also through the PTAs, and all of them will be available at the administration building. If you hear that a copy is out and you haven't gotten one, please call there. So with that, let's begin through some of the detail of what we want to accomplish. First, as I indicated, the full committee has been meeting now for several months. It meets as a committee of the whole periodically to review what information is gathered, to share our concerns and help work things through together. But much of the action really occurs at the subcommittee level, and that's why it's so important that we have the fine leadership in those areas with us tonight. One of the first pieces of information that was developed was the 10-year enrollment forecast. The enrollment subcommittee has reviewed in a great deal of detail the enrollment history. They analyzed historical and enrollment patterns, evaluated and selected the cohort survival formula for use as a methodology in developing their projection. They reviewed trends, projected birth rates, and the ratio of kindergarten enrollment after birth rate 5 years hence, which are key elements of the input that are necessary as we project in years 5 through 10 during the forecast period. The result of that forecasting effort indicates that the total enrollment is projected to continue its present decline really right through 1990, and then level off between 4,100 and 4,400 students. That would be down from the 5,200 student October enrollment level of this year, and down significantly from the peak of about 8,100 students in the system in 1966. If we look at the elementary area, certainly the area that has been impacted first by this decline, we can see that in the forecast that decline will continue next year with a reduction in total elementary enrollment by about 60 students in October of '84, and then stabilize very close to around 2,300 students for the remainder of the period. It should be obvious that this level could be accommodated in fewer buildings than we presently operate. Over the years, the decline has also resulted in shrinking class sizes, a greater disparity in the sizes among classes as we compare them from school to school and from section to section, and certainly a decline in the total number of students accommodated in each school building. Projected junior high enrollment will decline and begin to decline more rapidly beginning next fall. We expect that to continue to drop through 1987 and should hit a level of approximately 1,000 students at that point and level off. The administration estimates the present capacity of our junior high facilities, both Byron and Woodbury, at about 1,000 students per building. The high school level, the projected high school enrollment we expect to remain fairly close to the 1983 level on out through 1986. We then expect the decline to hit that area and continue through 1990. And that area should stabilize again at about 1,000 students in the post-90 period. Also completed to date has been the development of a 5-year financial forecast. As a part of that effort, a cost structure was developed, base case costs were identified, and cost escalation rates projected for each of those components of cost for each year in the 5-year forecast period. That projection shows that the largest single source of revenue will continue to be the property tax, which is contributing about 83% of the total revenue budget in the 1983-84 time frame. Little information on the distribution of costs as we see them. Variable instructional cost, which is a category that consists of teachers' salaries, support staff, benefits, supplies, and books, those things that relate to the actual education of children, account for 57% of the total expense budget for this year. Fixed operating costs, those would be the costs which would be associated with the operation of the building, would include a principal, other staff, maintenance, utilities, etc. Those account for about 20% of the total expense budget for the district. Fixed facility costs, which would be the cost that would continue forward even if a building was closed, would really be taken into account principally the minimum amount of heat that would need to be maintained in a building and provide for security, for lighting, just kind of the bare bones maintenance of the property. That accounts for about 1% of the total operating budget. Transportation costs amount to about 3%. Costs of the administration building, staff, etc., account for 5%. Warehouse and other district-wide service costs, 13%. When we look at the base case financial forecast, we can see a number of things. First, that expenses will rise at a higher rate than general inflation throughout the period. Also, that if we don't have a specific plan that will address them, it would appear that non-instructional costs, if looked at on a cost per student basis, could increase over the next 5 years at a rate which is about 14% higher than those of the instructional costs. If we take a look at the costs associated with the operating of the elementary buildings, you can see that really class size determines the major element of that cost. It really is based on looking at the cost of teaching expense, and if we look at that on a student basis, we can see really that the total dollars of that cost is the same if a teacher is teaching a class that's made up of 28 students, or if they're teaching a class that is made up of 16 or 17 students. Class sizes below the district average are certainly characteristic of the smaller elementary schools, which also tend to have higher than average cost per student than the larger schools. We look at fixed operating costs per student. They've increased significantly as the enrollment has dropped. And we can see that in the smaller schools, those fixed operating costs amount to as much as 40% of the amount spent on instruction per student. Certainly something to be concerned about. The fixed operating cost of grade structures. The committee has held discussions with principals, teachers, and administrators. Progress report by each committee was presented in detail to the board in December. I'm sure many of you attended that. If you missed that, I would suggest you take a look at the very excellent summary of that meeting, which appeared in the recent newsletter of the League of Women Voters. I suspect there are copies of that can be made available by them if you're interested. An additional subcommittee was formed in January to begin consideration of alternatives for use of space which might no longer be required for educational purposes. Both private and community use alternatives will be investigated by that group. Overall, we're working toward a completion of the 5-year plan for facility use. Hope to have that completed and presented before the end of May. Although we want to move on to the agenda so that we can devote most of this evening's time to getting your input, your feeling about some of these things, we would be willing at this point to take a few minutes to try to answer any questions you might have about some of the things that I've said, or perhaps just about things that the committees are doing in general. I would ask you to wave frantically if you would like to be recognized for a question, since it's a little hard to see from the lights up here. But are there any questions at this point? You're referring to the white sheet? The question was with regard to the decline in elementary school enrollment in the forecast relative to the rather steep decline that's shown for the junior high and senior high levels. Is that correct? Bob?
That's because, can you hear me? That's because of the birth rate has dropped off dramatically in the last half of the 70s. We now have a live birth rate of around 300.
As we all know, it's very difficult for a child to adjust to a teacher every year, let alone a new school. In terms of whether or not school levies would pass in the future, if such school closings, institutions of a Princeton plan were instituted, I can only say that I myself and other people who we know would consider leaving the Shaker school system in total rather than put up with such an institution of that type of plan.
Thank you. Would point out, I hope all of you are aware that the Princeton plan that was mentioned in that question is but one of the many alternatives of restructuring that are being looked at. Do I have any questions on this side? Comments, I'm sorry. Thank you, Eric. Yes, sir.
My name is Bob Stone, and I will address your two issues, but in a perhaps indirect manner. First of all, I think addressing the issue of costs is laudable. I think it has to be done. It's very important. I do believe that the closing of schools is the very last consideration in costs. I think it would be a major mistake, and I'll elaborate on that as I go along. I believe that there is a very serious problem with the Shaker schools as exists right now. I think it exists because very well-meaning people such as yourselves have made some major errors in the past, major errors in judgment that have led to very serious problems in the schools. I live in the Malvern District, and I think perfect examples of this exist in the Malvern District, and I hope that all of you are aware of them. I won't go into them now, but those are some of the reasons that we have declining enrollment in the Malvern schools, why people have put their children into private schools, and why many other people have chosen not to move into the Malvern District. And I'm familiar with examples such as that have arisen exactly because of some of these decisions that have been made. Statistics can be misleading. They show gross numbers, but they don't show the reasons that certain situations have existed. I would submit that if schools are closed, you will multiply a problem which already exists, that you will drive additional people out of the district, and that you will ultimately do serious, if not fatal, damage to this community. I'll close by addressing the issue I started with, and that is costs must be examined. Millage is very important to everybody. However, I think there are alternatives. And from all of the meetings and the feedback that I have heard from the various meetings, I have not heard other alternatives, major alternatives, addressed to save costs. And I agree that major steps may need to be taken, but I don't believe that school closings are the way to approach those steps.
Thank you. Are there other comments on this topic? People moving into seats rather than out of seats. Okay. We can then move on. Mr. Feldman, would you indicate the next point of discussion?
I will. Without foreclosing anybody from coming back to any earlier issue, since we obviously did not use up all the time that was allocated. Since we didn't use up all the time allocated at the first issue, no one should be foreclosed from coming back to it if they wish to. Second topic is really one that contains a number of sub-issues, and you may wish to speak to one or more or all of them. A facilities restructuring could impact on a number of important issues which affect schools, such as average class size, maximum class size, racial balance within specific schools, and future educational and extracurricular activities and programs. We'd like to hear any comments you may have regarding any of those factors as they relate to a possible restructuring. And maybe we should start with average class size, because that is a very important consideration in many different ways, and is something that is important for this committee to get a handle on as to how the community feels about it.
Any takers on that? Yes, sir.
My name is Bill Green, and although I am not now, I am a former school teacher. I'm an attorney now, but when I hear you say that there's classes in elementary schools with 16 or 17 students instead of 30, I say good, because I know that in a classroom with 16 or 17 students, the kids are getting a much better education than the same classroom with 30 students. I think a lot of parents feel the same way. When I hear that if we reduce the classrooms by 5 or 10 students, increase it, we're going to save 25%. I wonder how many parents would really want to save the 25% at the expense of their students or their children going to classrooms where there's 30 kids in the classroom. I think they underestimate the extent that this community would support even increased educational expenses. And I go along with what the doctor said earlier, the first speaker. The people in this community pride themselves on having quality schools. I don't think as a teacher, if you poll the school teachers, that they feel that with larger classrooms that these students will be getting the same education. I think we should strive to keep the classrooms small. That is a major reason why a lot of the parents are sending their children to private schools, because they're appalled with classrooms with 27, 28 students, when at a private school, their student could be in a classroom with 14 or 15 students. And I think every school teacher who's had experience in schools would back me up on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Green. Other comments? Yes.
I want to just primarily agree with that, but I would like to add a question on the cost effectiveness of small classes. I think there are a lot of children who function very well in a 17-child class who would not be able to function in a class with 20, 25, 28 children, who would then need special classes, learning disability, emotional disability, and that sort of class. So I hope that is going into the cost estimates as well, because that is very expensive.
I would like to just point out, as I give a chance for others to come to the microphone, a little detail on that average cost size, information that we suggested. The average size in this year, as I indicated, was about 20 students. The range that exists is really that from 15 students up to 28. We have a number of classes at 27, 28, so in that sense you have to look at it both in terms of what the average is, but obviously in terms of the students involved, it depends whether they're on the high side of that or on the low side of that individually. Are there other comments on any of the educational criteria issues? I think one thing that would be very helpful to us, as Mr. Feldman indicated, there are quite a list of those, and not only would we like to hear your feelings about specific ones, but also your sense of relative priorities, perhaps, between those. Yes, ma'am.
My name is Ellie Goldstein. One of the points you mentioned was racial integration. Shaker schools have always had a twofold purpose, and that has been excellence of education for all students as well as maintaining racial integration. And I would hope, I'd like to hear from you, that we would get some assurance that both of these things would be given equal consideration and that the impact of changes on the various communities as well as the city as a whole would be taken into consideration when changes are made.
I think that's certainly the case. One of the points I might make here is that, while many of these criteria that we're talking about, we can look at them in terms of balancing. The board has really given us a very specific charter with regard to maintaining our strong stance on integration, on racial balance. And in that sense, we really consider that to be a non-negotiable objective. Yes, ma'am.
I'm Jean Howard. I'd like to ask two questions, really. How do you determine what the most desirable class size is, and what is taken into account on that, whether it should be 20 or 18 or 25? Who makes that magic number, 20 versus 25? Where's the breaking point? And likewise, I'd like to know what are the class sizes in comparable communities in the area, both east and west? Where do we stand in terms of what we're offering versus what other people in the community are offering?
Okay. Might I turn to my education subcommittee people? Neil or Dr. Jefferson, would you like to address that?
What was the first question again?
What's the magic number, and where do you get the class size number?
We did a lot of talking to various people within the system here, administrators, teachers, and so on. We also had the benefit of some research and information on that. There isn't a lot of good data, in my opinion, on that. And it largely comes down to the way people feel about it. At least I'm speaking for myself now, largely. But I think our group would say that as a whole, too. One of the things that was clear was that apparently what happens when you get above about 25 students, speaking primarily in the primary education level, the amount of work for the teacher goes up almost astronomically. And they begin to feel that they're very pressed to do a good job. So one of the things that we concluded is that 25, 26 is about as high as we feel we ought to go. On the other end of the scale, there was some disagreement among the people we talked to in this, but there was the general feeling that there was a lower limit also, where there just aren't quite enough students to involve the students enough. They have various study groups and there just aren't enough to go around. And the points of disagreement ranged anywhere from like 14 to 18 as a minimum. So while it's not as clear cut, I think, where the break is on the minimum side, it's still there. With regard to the second question, we frankly haven't investigated what other school districts do. Well, I think we feel that that's nice information, but we feel that Shaker's a little bit different. And
if I were buying a house, I would want to know. I think you should look into that, because I think that's
from an investment standpoint, that's what people are comparing. What you get here versus what you get there. So I would hope you would consider that.
As we have some people moving up, let me just add one point to that. Right now, you sort of say, what are the determinants of that? And I will look to our superintendent to correct me if I get the numbers wrong. But our planning criteria is to require review and action to be taken in grades 2 through 6 at the primary level when we reach a maximum established by the board of 28 students. Generally, that results in a split, which takes you down to 14 or 15 and builds up depending on the total number of students in that particular grade area in that school. So this 20 number is really a number that results from the number of schools, the total enrollment, and the distribution of those students, and does not represent a particular plan or objective in terms of getting there. Yes, sir.
My name is Michael Shapiro. Assume everyone can hear me. First, I'll speak very personally. Very personally, I am opposed to the closing of any schools. The reason is that we personally moved from one part of Shaker to another within the same school district, same school itself. And the reason why we moved is because there are local schools nearby and a local junior high school nearby. And I think that I personally am in favor of this. Now, I want to go to the broader political issue because I think it's significant. You may be cutting off your noses to spite your face. What I'm saying is if you take a look at the cost factor of, say, a 25% reduction in cost, you have to realize that I'm not an accountant, but you have to realize that the property taxes are tax deductible for federal income taxes. So that this great cost reduction you're having is another way that you're helping to subsidize the federal government. In other words, by making the property taxes lower, you're all increasing your federal income taxes. Secondly, and very importantly, I agree with the doctor that many people move to Shaker because of the local schools. And therefore, I think you're going to be reducing your property values. People don't mind paying these property taxes. They have repeatedly, I think 9 of the last 10 levies or 8 of the last 9 levies that people have passed because they want this. So what you're doing is you're going to reduce property taxes and make the federal government richer, and you've achieved some cost cuts here and make kids go to other schools that they don't want to go to.
Thank you, Mr. Shapiro. Yes, sir.
Jim Marsh is my name. My wife and I moved to Shaker Heights because of the quality of the school system here and its reputation. I have 1 student in kindergarten. I have 2 more potential students in a few years. I will be involved with the Shaker school system through my youngsters for the next 17 or 18 years. I expect in the next 17 or 18 years to pay additional amounts to heat my home and to do all the other things I have to do. And I expect to pay more money to educate my children here in Shaker. I am most concerned about the quality of schools here and what the quality will be in 5 years, in 10 years, and 15 years. In fact, after my children leave the schools, I will still be concerned about the quality of education in this community. I am opposed to any restructuring whatsoever that reduces in any way the quality of the education in this community. I think it is one of the primary assets of Shaker Heights. I think Shaker Heights has a history of fine and excellent schools. I think there has been a community effort by citizens long before I was born in this community to initiate a quality school system, to maintain it over the years, and I think it is the responsibility of the school board and of your group to ensure that that quality is maintained in the future. I think it is absolutely essential that whatever changes are being talked about, that they be talked about in terms of quality. I am willing as a citizen in this community to pay more money for education. I am concerned most about quality. I agree about class size. I think the decline in enrollment presents a tremendous opportunity to improve the quality of education. I am sure 1966, when you had 8,000 students in the school system, was not ideal in terms of the capacity of the buildings. I suspect that there was a tremendous problem of overcrowding. The reduction of the number of students gives you the opportunity of reducing class size and improving the variety of education offered. It certainly provides a great deal of flexibility within the elementary school buildings to offer improved programs in math and science and computer programming at the elementary level.
Thank you, Mr. Marsh.
My name is Beth Mermelstein. I have a couple of things that I'd like to point to. The first, I guess, Mr. Feldman, that you talked about before, about how much do we have to do before people will stop paying more levy. I've been involved in a lot of groups that have been talking about this, and I think many people feel that savings do have to be made. As far as class size, I used to teach school. I'm a newcomer to Shaker. I love the schools, that's why I moved here. And I'm going to stick with them and hopefully see them through what must be a tough time. But I think I would be willing to give 5 more students to a second grade class rather than bus my kid all over town and back. If we can keep the neighborhood schools, then I might be willing to make a little bit of a trade-off and say, okay, put 3 more kids in that class, but don't take my child away from his elementary school. If you take my child away from his elementary school and put 5 more kids in his class, then I don't think you're going to get my money in the sense of more tax money. I'm not sure how representative my feelings are, but I think there are a lot of taxpayers out there who maybe aren't here tonight who do believe that savings need to be made, and maybe we need to do a little bit of bargaining. That's as far as I'm concerned.
Thank you.
I'm Jim Wilcox. The general feeling of most of the people that have spoken tonight, my wife and I are in disagreement with. We feel that we live in Shaker Heights. We do not live in Mercer. We do not live in Malvern. We do not live in Longmont. We do not live in Ludlow. We live in Shaker Heights. Education, closing schools does not mean worse education. Closing schools just means reutilization of the total school system. Whereas everyone else has said, when they have lived in Shaker for a short period of time, I have lived here all my life. I'm a graduate of the whole system. And when I went to elementary school in Shaker, no one knew what school you went to. They were all equal. Not one was better. It really didn't matter what school you went to when you showed up at the junior highs. This should continue. I don't know if that's true today. I think by having larger elementary schools with everyone, with the buildings utilized, with the classes a more normal size, I think it will be easier to educate our children. I think there's a question of priorities that hasn't been set. Education should be number one, but I also feel the social aspect of what our children experience is very, very important. It is very difficult to get balance in a school, in an elementary school, that has 1/3 grade with 13 kids in it. There are just not enough people for the students to have a full educational and social experience. No one seems to address this fact. I think it is extremely important. We have lived, in my experience, in four of the different elementary school districts. It really doesn't make any difference. It doesn't. Most of the kids stay in school during lunchtime now, so it's not like they're bused home twice a day like when I went to school. Education is important, and so is the social aspect.
Thank you. Yes, sir, in the back.
Hi,
Ma'am?
Dolores
Laura Surde. And I raised two daughters that went through the schools. I'm very proud of them and the school system here. Now I'm starting with a new generation of young children to see that they go through Shaker, and I just thought I could just real quickly give my quick thoughts. I think smaller classes are very desirable. We didn't have them. And busing is not only a cost factor, but I think it's a terrible imposition to put on all these young mothers that have to put their children on buses that go from one end of Shaker to the other. And the school district is Shaker Square almost out to Sulgrave Road. And I feel that the high school should be the only distance that these children through their years in Shaker should have to trouble themselves to go out of their district to get to. Thank you.
Thank you. Other comments on education criteria? If not, Mr. Feldman, will you lead us into the next one, please?
A number of grade configuration patterns are being studied by the committee. These include moving the 9th grade to the high school, moving 6th grade to the junior high schools, using the Princeton plan or a cluster approach in the elementary school levels, and maintaining the present grade configuration. We would appreciate any views you might like to give us on these grade configurations, which you might favor and why, or not favor and why.
We had a few comments on that earlier. Are there others who would like to talk about organization? Yes, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Chris Wamsley. I just have a question before we get into this a little further. I wanted to know if you have studied the impact that this grade configuration has had in other communities who have closed schools or set up these plans within our local city area. If you contacted other school systems who have maybe gone to the Princeton plan or gone to clustering and discussed with them, you know, what the political impact was as far as getting levies passed, their education criteria, that kind of thing.
Okay, before I pass that on, let me just comment at the first part of that, and that is to say that, you know, we are really, you know, at the very early stages of looking at all of these. And while I'm sure the Education Committee will tell you, you know, what they have found to date in that regard, you know, I'd just like to say, you know, we have not drawn any conclusions, and much of that remains to be studied and looked at. And your point about getting information from other districts is certainly very important in that. Do either of my two subcommittee people in that area have any feedback they could offer at this time?
The only feedback we have is this. Can you hear me? Can you hear me now? The only feedback that we have at this time is that I'm sure before this process is finished, all the input that's reasonable will certainly be tapped. We are certainly aware of school closings all around us, really. Orange and I think Parma, and there are some others. They seem to be occurring every day. So we have a lot of resources from which to choose. Of course, keeping in mind that any input that we receive in this regard is just simply that. And it's my view, and I'm sure I speak for the committee, that kind of input would be very valuable to us in terms of shaping our framework for recommendations relative to any directions in this regard.
You know, also I might add to that, you know, while we as a committee of citizens like all of you are seeking to learn more about those alternatives, I'm assured by the superintendent that he and his staff are also looking at those same issues and will help in providing, pulling together the resources and research that we need in the education field for what is really some very specialized, educational kinds of questions. Was there? Okay, yes, in the back, please.
I want to go back. We had trouble hearing you. I guess I have a question about what other kind of costs are being examined. We couldn't quite hear, so maybe you just cover it. But I, like other parents, don't feel that closing schools is a true answer. I think there are other costs that should be examined. So maybe you could go over that again, please.
Just to provide a sort of a general comment on that first, the charter of this committee was very specific, and that was to look at those things that relate to facility utilization. It was not a general charter. It was not a committee to look at all manners of district costs. There was a previous citizens committee that was involved to some degree with that last year. I suspect the district may be responding to that in its own way in terms of looking at that further. So I guess from the point of view of the committee, all I can say is that while you make a very excellent point in terms of the fact that there may be some other areas, what we have looked at has been that which is within our charter, and which frankly, as we look at the overall cost structure, represents really the largest percentage of the total costs that we're dealing with. Are there others that would like to comment on that from my group?
Hi,
Okay,
my name is Diane Waldman, and I'm going back to what you guys were talking about before. I have 3 children in the elementary school system, and my feelings for sending a 6th grade prepubescent boy into a junior high school situation, or even a girl who's beginning to grow up into a junior high situation with 8th graders, I think it's a mistake. I'm not a psychologist, but just my mother instincts. I don't feel comfortable knowing that my little boy is in school with 14-year-old children in a totally different social framework that I believe I would rather see like 1st through 3rd with 4th through 6th rather than the other way. I don't think a 6th grade child belongs up with the big kids yet. It's not ready.
Thank you. Yes,
I'm Roger Hancock. I just recently moved to Shaker Heights from the west side. Again, the reason was the schools. I think the quality of education is paramount here in this community. That's why we moved here. I don't understand the commotion about the busing. I grew up in a small town in Connecticut, and we were bused all the time. I think that, again, if it comes down to quality of education versus closing schools or busing or what have you, all right, so be it. Let's keep the quality high. The other thing I'd like to just ask a question of the committee, just sort of a brief rundown of the Princeton plan. I'm not familiar with it.
Neil, would you like to address that for us in terms of the mechanics of the Princeton plan?
Is this working this time? No? Essentially, it involves putting smaller numbers of grades together. For example, a K-1-2 type of situation. And as it would work, say here, you would put all of the K-1-2 students into 2 or 3, whatever the case may be, maybe 4 of the elementary schools. And then the next step would be 3, 4, 5, for example. I don't think there's anything sacred about exactly what they are, but it does imply more classrooms in a given grade in a given school. And it also implies more transportation of students.
What's been the rationale for this? Has it been done as a cost thing in other communities, or is it thought to be pedagogically a sound idea? What's the philosophy?
I think the primary one, without any doubt, is as a real benefit toward integration. I think it's also true to say that a lot of people feel that it is not detrimental to an overall education. It's not really essential to have, as we have here, say K through 6. That it works just as well K through 2 or K through 3, whatever the configuration actually is.
I think it's also our understanding that, while this has been tried in some districts, its success rate varies significantly, and its acceptability in systems vary significantly. Might I ask our superintendent if he would like to comment on that more technical issue?
Without attempting to get into too much detail, Princeton Plan has primarily been used as an integration method where two schools are paired. One school, children would go usually from kindergarten through perhaps 3rd grade, and then children would go to another school for the perhaps 4th through 6th grade. It's a way of two attendance areas being combined, and it's done in a way to provide for racial balance. It meets with success, varying in terms of acceptance in the community, and quite frankly, in Shaker Heights and other communities where integration is successful, it depends upon what happens in the school. If it's a good educational program, people feel satisfied with it, and having children transported there does not become the issue. If they're less than satisfied with the educational program, then of course people would not feel that it meets with success. We of course intend to make sure all the programs in the schools, no matter what the configuration happen to be, turns out to be successful in terms of the quality.
Yes, sir.
I'm Chuck Seymour. The discussion here as to the changing of the grade configurations would bother me because the discussion here runs to a change of the basic neighborhood school principle that Shaker has developed over the years of the system. And speaking as a parent with an elementary child, I would have a problem having that child transferred from school to school to meet a Princeton-type program or another program, both from my concern of his emotional handling of that problem, whether it be at age 6, 7, or 8, and also from the standpoint as a taxpayer in supporting that type of program. If there is a change in configuration to be made, it would be more acceptable for me personally to see that configuration made at the junior high level, or when the child would normally have reached a maturity, both in terms of social and academic experience, that he could handle a change, whether it be a closing of a junior high or a transferring of grade levels of the junior high, but not at the point of making that configuration a disruption of the neighborhood elementary schools.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I'm Shelley Lachmanen from Lomond School area, and I'm concerned about what this is going to do, a Princeton program to the magnets. The Shaker School Plan seems to be working very well. Lomond is the French and the science magnet. We'd hate to lose it. I'm also concerned about a Princeton cluster plan in relation to what it would do for role models for the younger kids in terms of school experiments in civics and stuff like that. It's the 6th graders that are in the student council. It's the 6th graders that are safety patrol. It's a minor point, but who do the kindergartners, who do the 2nd graders learn from if they don't see this in their school? This is an important part to my daughter to see these people on stage. They're making speeches. They want to be part. These are our leaders for Shaker and for the rest of our country. And all of our students are seeing this from the ground level up. And I'm concerned that we keep this.
I have a 6th grader too, so I'm very familiar. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Bob Kleinman. The assumption is that if we're talking about facilities utilization, that some schools are going to have to be closed. And if an elementary school is closed, it seems to me that wherever that elementary school is, suddenly that's not a neighborhood school anymore in that area. Happens to somebody, we close the school. The Princeton plan, as I understand it, and I guess I'm looking for comments from the board too, basically, it doesn't necessarily involve busing from, one end of the community to the other. What it says is that if we cluster two schools together, we just have a larger neighborhood. We have two schools that are close together that become one larger neighborhood, and the kids go to that neighborhood school. It just doesn't have to be a small neighborhood. There'll still be kids who can walk, and there may be some kids at the edge of the neighborhood who can't walk. I think that's true in some of our schools today. So I'm not sure it's as dramatic as some of the comments indicated might be.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
My name is Yvonne Craig. I'm a brand new resident of Shaker Heights. My husband and I chose to live here because of the school system. The community that we moved from, our children were in classes of 28. They alternately either were at their neighborhood school or they were bused to another school. I don't have quite as many reservations in that area as people who may not have experienced that. What my basic concern is that your committee may not have been allowed to do the job that you should have been doing, which is to take a look at the total school budget, to take a look at what is going to happen as we project the dollars out into the future. What I'm concerned about is what kind of curriculum are my children going to have as they move through the school system? Are we going to be able to keep the choices from foreign language? Are we going to be able to keep the advanced classes? Are we going to be able to have all the choices, a music program for the children as they go through? What are those kind of choices that we have to make if these dollars are not cut someplace? A second comment, which is slightly related, if you start talking about closing schools in these neighborhoods and developing alternative uses of the sites, I think you may find a whole other group of people who will be sitting here to talk to you who have not come out yet. Our experience in the town, we moved them, we closed half the elementary schools, we closed one of the junior highs, we closed one of the high schools. We went through this in successive years, and as the schools were looked at as alternative uses, all of a sudden the people who lived there were coming out and starting to tell the school board, who then began being looked at as real estate developers, how they felt about what was being done to the nature of their neighborhood. And so it no longer is an educational issue, it becomes very much a real community land use issue. And I don't think that that can be avoided either. So if you're starting to take a look at really closing schools, you're going to have to get those people in the neighborhood, the larger neighborhood, involved very soon, or you won't be able to make a well-informed decision.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Thank you. My name is John Edwards, and from what I've heard, the Princeton plan described this evening, I'm surprised to hear that it's an option being considered by a committee whose charter is to contain costs, because it doesn't sound to me as if it contains costs. It sounds to me like it doubles the inconvenience for the two clustered schools, saves no cost, and really is a cost that's supposed to be paid for a social benefit, which, from what I know of the Shaker schools, is a social benefit that this system doesn't need. I suggest that the money that would be spent on that plan ought better to be spent on real educational value for the children in the school district. Thank you.
I wonder if, since I don't see anyone moving forward yet, I might move. I mean, we are talking about a lot of alternatives, none of which is favored above any other at this point. One of the areas that I do not remember hearing much about this evening is the shift, or the possible shift of ninth grade into the high school environment. And I wonder if there would be any individuals who would want to address that sort of reorganization.
Yes, Bruce Moffett.
Yes, sir.
I'd be willing to address that. I personally would be very pleased if that would happen. I think that a four-year high school, or indeed if you went to a 7-5 type of situation, could be a benefit to an educational system. From personal experience, having gone through a 3-year high school, I started language in 9th, went to high school and found out that the people who started first-year language hadn't done as well. Now, maybe in this system, you handle what would have normally been a 4-year kind of continuation, building on courses better than I experienced in the past. But I feel very strongly that a 4-year high school would be an improvement.
Thank you.